originating from the podcast studio inside FAM 360's headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. This is the Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast. The Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast is designed to encourage, equip, and inspire our audience through a combination of inspirational stories and real-life experiences shared by other successful and skilled leaders in a variety of vocations. We hope that the Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast empowers each one of us to step out, step up, and ultimately thrive as leaders. Now here's our host, Mr. Matt Maloney.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Mr. Matt Maloney. I was thinking about a word today about how excited I am about today's guest, and a word that came to mind is ecstatic. I'm just ecstatic about today's guest. But before I introduce her, I'll give a little background on her. She is a powerful leader, what I would consider certainly a powerful leader in many walks of her life, led by her faith and her love of the gospel. She is an American contemporary Christian music singer-songwriter, author, worship leader, artist, and Bible teacher. She has a master's degree in theological studies and a doctorate in worship studies. And she has won a Grammy and 6 GMA Dove Awards. She is a mother of 4. Her children, Josie, her twins, Ben and Griffin, and her youngest, Timothy, and married to her lifelong sweetheart, Martin. So her song Blessings won a Grammy Award for the Best Contemporary Christian Music Song and Billboard Music Award for Top Christian Song. And she's written a number of books, which I didn't even realize. I realized she had written 2 books, but she's actually written 4 books. And we'll dive into some of that today. So before I introduce her, I'd like to start off with this quote that I thought kind of encapsulates her. And it's actually a quote from her. It says, "What if our expectations are hindering us from being part of something God has in store that goes exceedingly beyond our hopes and dreams?" Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Miss Laura Story Elvington.
Thanks. That's a lot of stuff.
That's a lot of
It's
stuff.
a lot of stuff that I've done. That makes me want to take a nap.
I'm like, I didn't even read all of it. I didn't even cover all of it. There's still a number of things there. I was like, whoa.
I must be really old.
No, you're really experienced.
That's what it
There
is, experience.
Experience. I thought we'd start off, you're such an accomplished, singer-songwriter, musician, but I thought I'd love for you just to share with the audience, for those that may not know you, just share a little bit about your musical journey. How did you get into music and what you're doing today? Yeah,
and even as you say all those things, they do sound like very extraordinary accomplishments, but I think being on my side of the table, they all came about in a very ordinary way. I grew up, as any kid whose mom made them take piano lessons and bribed me to practice things like that. I started taking piano when I was 6, and then started taking string bass lessons, which is so weird. There was an orchestra program at our school, and it was
like stand up string bass.
That's the one.
I love it.
That was the one. And even as a girl, I remember them coming through and talking about the orchestra program and saying, you can choose violin, viola, cello, bass, but bass is really just for the boys. And I think that was the challenge.
That was it. You're like, oh, really? I don't think so.
Exactly. You will not tell me that I can't play, but the joke was on me because I had to lug it around for the next, 10, 20 years. And so that's kind of how I started in music. And I was super involved in my church, played in their orchestra. I think I was in the kids choir for a little while, but I really wasn't much of a singer. It wasn't until college. It was my sophomore year of college. I met some guys who had just started a band, a contemporary Christian band. If you're familiar with the band Caedmon's Call, it wasn't Caedmon's Call, but it was like a coffee house, folksy Caedmon's Call knockoff kind of band. Yeah. And as someone who had been in orchestra my whole life, they were like, "Hey, would you want to bring your bass and play?" And I thought, this is by far the coolest thing I've
yes,
this is ever cool. Going from the dorchestra to like a band. I couldn't even believe it. So I did that and ended up taking a little bit of time off of school and traveled with them for, I don't know. I guess I was with them for 5 years, which is like
Wow.
every parent's dream. You send your kid off to college and they're like, I think I'm going to drive out and travel with a band for a little bit.
I'm going to join a band and travel around and just kind of see how this goes.
And see how I find myself, something like that, And so it's funny even thinking now about, my poor parents, what they must have thought. But it really was the beginning of me just kind of seeing what, as a creative, and as someone with some musical talent, maybe some writing talent, I never was like that arts and science kind of student.
Yeah,
and as someone who struggled in school, and for college to be that, you're going to go to college and you're going to figure out that lifelong job.
Yeah,
and it really is kind of a daunting thing.
Here's the box. You're going to follow this path. This is what everybody's supposed to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you find yourself not fitting in the box.
Yeah.
And I just was really struggling to see any marketable skills that I could possibly offer to the workforce.
And who would have known that the upright bass joining a band would have led you to where
I know. It's kind of funny to think back on that, and that God really did have a plan for, even all my scholastic struggles. As you read those degrees that I have somehow earned, even those have all been a very slow process. So for college took me about 8 years. I would go full time and then I'd, flunk a course, get discouraged, and I'd just take one course at a time and travel. And then I was out of school for a little while and just decided to go to, but by the time I finished college after 8 years, I was like, oh, this is how you study.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, you don't learn that until afterwards.
I know.
I
and
didn't
was
learn
like,
that until afterwards.
I'm just getting started. And then I decided to go to seminary. I was like, oh, I can study something that I can study the Bible. Like, I really like the Bible. I don't have to study chemistry. Like, let's do something I like. And really loved going to seminary. And then eventually it just kind of felt like, so I did my doctorate when I had 3 little children, which it sounds like the worst time in the world to start a doctoral program. But I felt like my brain was deteriorating. I felt like I was.
So it kind of called you to say, hey, I need to get my brain back. Is that why you decided to do your doctorate, or the doctorate itself was deteriorating your brain?
No, yes, both. Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Both, yeah.
No, it really was. I kind of take it that I can be super real on this podcast.
Without a doubt.
Being a mom is one of the greatest joys of my life. And I love my children, but I think growing up, I saw it as this either or paradigm.
Oh, sure.
Like, you work, and then if you get to be a mom, then you're a mom and you give 100% to that. Mm-hmm. And I never saw, so is there a place for, I'd call it the working mom, or not even the working mom, but just the mom that does something other than just be a mom. Because I feel like I wasn't very good at, thrashing my own wheat and baking bread for my kids.
I want to be good at that, but I'm just struggling at that.
And does that make me a bad mom? And the fact that I still had this desire to, not just to use my brain in a scholastic way, but even to use the skills that I had gotten my master's in. Yeah. And so at first I thought, well, there's no way I have time to get my doctorate. And then I realized, hey, I watch at least an hour and a half of Netflix every night.
That's your escape, right?
Maybe if I found a different escape, there's only so many Friends episodes you can watch, and so it really was neat to begin to see that there are programs out there that I could, I can carve out that 45 minutes a day to work on. And it was tough, but it was really helpful for me to see that being a good mom doesn't mean that you have to give up everything else. Yeah, of course. Well, it's... And did I even answer the question? No, you did. I know you were asking more musical, and I went school on you. No, but you still walked us... I'm still kind of sitting in you... kind of in college, standing up on stage with this bass. Let me pick up there then. So I'm in college band after 5 years with them. They decided they were going to move to Nashville. And I decided, I was probably 12 credits away from finishing school. And I thought, man, I really need to stay. It was an interesting decision because I truly, at that point, had begun to love music, had started to write music. And so, yeah, moving to Nashville seemed like the obvious thing. Yet I really felt like I needed to leave the band and finish school.
Yeah.
But I still had this idea, like, so what? I've written all these songs. What am I going to do with them? And so I decided to make like a songwriter's demo, which because at that point I was so young in my career that I actually thought that publishing companies would listen to demos if you mailed them to them, which now I know better. But I was working on that with a friend of mine. So I had done Young Life for a little bit. And a friend of mine I had met through Young Life was a guy named Ed Cash. And Ed had moved to Nashville and started producing more. And he's just an incredible person, incredible musician and producer. And I had shared these songs with him, probably 3 of them. And we had talked with a record label and just didn't feel like the right fit. So I'm back, in school trying to, do those 8 a.m. classes and stuff like that. And Ed called and said, hey, I'm recording this basically brand new artist, a guy named Chris Tomlin. And we're doing his very first record with, I think it was Sparrow at the time was the group he was with, but he said, we're looking for one last song, and I played him one of your demos, and I'm wondering how would you feel about Chris recording this? And I had heard of Chris because we had been at a Passion conference together, and obviously, even if you're a worship leader, you knew who Chris Tomlin was.
Course, right.
But it was before the rest of the world.
Knew who he was, yeah.
He had never had a radio single, and so anyway, a song I'd written called Indescribable. They chose that for his first radio single. So it was neat, even just seeing how kind of being patient with the process.
Yeah.
Like where I really felt like I needed to stay there. But at first it seemed like the dumbest move for a, singer-songwriter rather than moving to Nashville with the band I was in.
Right, yeah.
But it really was something where the Lord kind of brought it back around in his timing. And that was the beginning of me.
So let me ask a quick question to interject. So did Chris, was he recording Indescribable, which was your song, while you were finishing your 12 credits at college? Yes,
which was also really weird.
But that's so cool. Like how God came in and said, listen, be patient. I'm gonna use you. Well, you can stay here, but use you in this way to, that's amazing.
Well, and it was kind of the beginning of maybe a principle that God has for a long time been trying to establish in my life of it's not about being famous, it's about being faithful.
That's great.
And I always share that with younger worship leaders. I always share that with any, aspiring songwriters. And it's not that I live that out perfectly, but it's more that I see that the seasons of my life that I've tried my best to be famous are the ones that I've miserably failed. Yeah. But when I seek to be faithful, just faithful in the little things, I say little things, it wasn't a little thing that my parents had saved money to send me to college. And I needed to be faithful to honor that by finishing. Following that, I ended up signing with a label and had some radio songs of my own. But at the time, it was neat because I was able to stay and be faithful in finishing school while Chris was going out there being famous, but God was still using me as part of that. And it was neat to see, it really has been, especially as a worship leader, it's neat to see people, like I've gone to churches before where they've been singing Indescribable. Yeah. And I'm standing there. No one has any idea.
They have no clue. Yeah.
That I wrote it.
Yeah.
And honestly, who the heck cares?
Yeah, right.
Because it's a song about an indescribable God.
Yeah. In many cases, God seemingly, at least from my perspective, seemingly was saying, no, you need to stay the course here, be faithful. I mean, is it surreal when you look back at all the things that you've been able, from the books to the Grammys to the Dove Award? I mean, all of those things.
And I don't mean to talk poorly about the awards because they really have, they've been part of the journey. And any like worldly spotlight that can be put on I'd say my story, but a story that really isn't mine. If you were to ask me, like, what's been the main focus of my songs, of my books, it really is God using ordinary people to do extraordinary things. So if there's any sort of spotlight that has come upon my story from those, awards or whatever, then I'm thankful for that. But the awards in and of themselves, well, I'll give you a picture. So when we went to the Grammys, I was nominated. I was not planning on going because I thought that was the funniest thing in the world. Even the thought of me.
You're like, what? No.
I would
That's
never.
great.
It's
somehow
not
my
like,
name slipped on there.
Yeah,
They were good. Yeah.
It's not like they're going to give that Grammy to me. Like, let's be honest. And it's all the way out in California. Well, I ended up, it was on a Sunday night, and the Friday before, I had an event that was about an hour from LA. So I was already going to be, and that's the only reason we went. And so Martin and I was pregnant with Josie at the time. I remember, we'd never been to the Grammys before. We didn't know anything about it. So my concern, like, there was the pre-show that was at 5 and we wanted to get there early. And then the whole thing goes till like 11. So I remember being pregnant and hungry. So we went by Subway. And I brought a foot-long,
yes,
a foot-long sub sandwich that I shoved in my purse. I brought this huge purse, and I'll never forget.
Inside the Grammys.
Smuggling in.
Yes.
Oh yeah. That's like, what are these rednecks from Georgia doing at the Grammys?
This should be a Subway. Tune in. This should be a Subway commercial right here.
So literally, we show up. And even the after party, I remember there were women in like bikinis with like headdresses dancing on the tables. And I was like, where are we? What are we?
We're in another universe.
So you use the word surreal, and I'm like, yeah, there's a lot that's been surreal because it's not really the world that we live in. But we've been grateful for any of it that we've been able to be part of, to the extent that it draws attention to the message, not that it draws attention to me. And, and I think a lot of that is, with experience, as you so kindly put it. I was that kid that, for a while just enjoyed being in the spotlight and all that. And I still have moments of that. But what you realize is that it's not about you and it's not about the acclaim. Because I'll tell you what happened. So two things. So we get back from the Grammys. And the first event, I played a middle school cafeteria in like Burlington, Vermont.
Love it. That's God showing you, hey,
absolutely.
This is,
And I'm like, well, apparently winning a Grammy, people are like, oh, what's that? And I was like, well, barely doesn't mean anything because I'm playing a middle school cafeteria. I was like playing a church lock-in. I was like, oh, apparently I've arrived. But the other thing that I learned, the label, my record label had a wonderful celebration. And then after we celebrated, they moved on to, okay, how can we win the next Grammy?
Right.
And you realize that even success, it's less of a podium and more like a treadmill. Because any accolade puts you to a place where you have to think about the next next year, let's win 2 Grammys.
Yeah. How do we ramp this treadmill up and go faster? How do we go further?
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it is a lot of pressure. And you just realize that those things are more fleeting than they may appear on the surface.
Amazing story. When you look at yourself, right, do you view yourself as someone who is a leader?
I mean, that's a good question. I think it took me a long time to view myself as a leader.
Yeah.
Because it certainly was never anything I aspired to be.
Sure.
But I think the more I've learned about, the leadership positions that I've found myself in, whether that's, I'm in a leadership position at my church. Yeah. I have the responsibility of leading others in worship. I often get to lead in the sense of, encouraging other artists on their journey as someone that's kind of gone ahead of them. I think that leadership probably is more about stewardship than it is about this prominent position that we have aspired to. It's, okay, what have I been entrusted with? Whether that's the life lessons I've learned, whether that's resources that I have, been given. It's how am I using the things I've learned and the things that I've gained to help others along. I think that's probably more of what I've learned leadership to be.
Who do you look up to right now, or perhaps somebody that you've looked up to over time as a leader, someone who's maybe helped you along your journey? And what did that look like for you? Like, why is it that you look up to that person, or that you just, admire how they stewarded you along the way?
Oh, that's good. Because for me, there's not anyone that I can think of that has gone before me in my exact story. So there's another part of my story where, which we'll get to at some point.
Yeah.
So my husband has a disability, and that's a big part of our story. It's a big part of how I was even motivated to step into some of these leadership positions where I wouldn't have been otherwise. So when I look at, there aren't that many mom of 4, wife of disabled husband, singer-songwriter, church leadership people that I can look to.
No doubt.
But there are certainly men and women that I go to often for counsel, and I'd say the two ones that come to mind just immediately, a man named Bill Wood, who he's a pastor at our church, who pastors people well, loves people well, helps them understand the truths of the scripture, which is a passion of mine.
Yeah.
And another woman named Sherry Wilhelm, who her husband has Parkinson's, and she has really loved him well in that, but also has figured out how to still have her own identity and her own personal ministry in the midst of them walking that hard road together. And so those two people have probably been the greatest source of just pouring into me.
Yeah.
And also just, it's going to people for counsel often. That's a big part of leadership, but also finding people that you can be gut-wrenchingly honest with.
Yeah, transparent with.
Because if you were to ask me what's the biggest downfall I see in leaders, it's them having more fans than they do friends, or having people. So we'll have. So in the music industry, it's so often you can have fans that just love you, or haters that just hate you.
Yeah.
But what the greater need for people in my position are people that truly love you, but not for what you do, but for who you are.
Yeah, of course.
And people that you can be honest with you, that can be honest with you when you are being that arrogant person that's seeking fame.
Yeah.
And saying, hey, something, a conversation that Bill has had with me before. Hey, do you think maybe you took too many events this spring? How are you loving your family well? Because that's am I too busy getting out there being famous to stay home and be faithful to the things that God's called me to at my house and at my church? And so having people in my life that will really ask me the hard questions.
Yeah, that accountability factor.
They make me
huge.
a better leader.
Yeah, that's good. I have found that many people that are friends of mine, again, leaders in different businesses or in nonprofits or in the church world, when I talk about it, what do your friendships look like? It's very thin. Yeah. Very, very thin. And it's very lonely in that regard. And my wife has challenged me a number of times. She's like, you don't have a lot of friends that you're going deep with right now. Yeah. I mean, you're in that discipleship group that you meet with, once a week and you guys talk, but you really, and there is this responsibility that we have to also to ourselves to make sure that we're being honest with ourselves there and keep people around us that can be and hold us accountable. Well,
and even something for me, I have very little capacity for friends because I'm serving my family, serving my church, serving outside the church, lots of things that I'm realizing that my relational capacity doesn't, I'm just not able to have a ton of friends. Mm-hmm. But I have 2 mentors that I just mentioned to you, and I have 2 friends. And those,
That's it.
I just have 2 friends.
2 mentors, 2 friends. That's it.
That's all I can do.
Yeah.
And for a while I was like, what is wrong with me that I only, but the truth is even if it's just 2 people who know you,
Yeah.
or that you can shoot a text to and say, man, I'm struggling today. That's enough. If as long as those roots are going deep with those 2 people, I kind of I've seen my ministry before as like as a tree that has a lot of branches on it. Yeah. And, and thankful to God that, that he's allowed me to go many different places, talk to many different people. But when you think about a tree with a lot of branches, it will topple over if there are not roots that go deep. So those are the 4 roots in my life that go deep. And if I'm not spending time nurturing those relationships, then I do feel like a weakness even in the things that I'm doing ministry wise.
I just want to say thanks for first of all taking the time. I know you're busy.
Oh my gracious, I'm so glad.
I know you have so much going on, and we're just honored to have you here to be able to share your story, share your journey. I know it's inspired people that are on this podcast and listening in. So thank you again for that. For those of you that want to learn more about Laura, you can find her books and music online. Check out laurastorymusic.com or www.laurastorymusic.com. Can't wait to have you on the next episode. As a closing quote, I'd like to exit with this: be happy for this moment, for this moment is your life. And that's Omar Kaham. I hope I pronounced that right. To all of our subscribers out in podcast land, thank you for tuning in. I hope today's episode was both empowering and inspirational. Until the next episode, I pray that our daily lives are filled with opportunities to lift others up as we aim to go above and beyond. Thanks, everybody.
Our executive producer and host is Matt Maloney, President and CEO of FAM360. Strategic Communication Coordinator, Michelle Ducato. Production assistance by Tin Dog Studios. Director, John Broland. Creative Assistant, Whitney Broland. Theme song, Connecting Dots by Curtis Cole, provided by Artlist. Please subscribe today and don't miss any of our weekly episodes.